Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first live stream panel of Iconicon 2022. I'm Conrad, one of the co-hosts of the podcast movie Oubliette, where we review sci-fi, fantasy, and horror films that most people have forgotten. My beloved co-host Dan is safely tucked up in bed in Australia, having just celebrated his birthday. Happy birthday, Dan. So he's not with us today, but I'm very fortunate to have another wingman, Matt Swaford from Endless Bullets, the action movie podcast. Hello, Matt.
Hello. You could be my wingman anytime, Conrad.
So would you like to tell us a bit about your podcast and our crossover for Iconicon?
Absolutely. My podcast is Endless Bullets, the action movie podcast. It is a relatively new podcast. I just started January this year, and I'm the host, and it's basically an intimate conversation between myself and my one guest that I always have, and it's an alternating cast, basically. And I'm a lifelong movie fan, and I specifically love action movies, and I just love talking about them with people. And we cover the good stuff, the bad stuff, and everything in between.
And our crossover for Iconicon?
Yes, we did a crossover with movie Oubliette and Endless Bullets, and it is on the 1988 film Dead Heat, starring Treat Williams and Joe Piscopo, and it is one of my favorite episodes that we've done so far. So really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that video premieres tomorrow in Iconicon. Check out the schedule on iconicononline.com to follow that one. But today we are talking about a cult horror comedy movie that's much beloved from 1985, House. And we're very lucky to have two special guests with us today who can talk to us about it. First up, we have a senior research fellow at Birmingham City University, co-host of the enormously successful Soda Jerker on Songwriting podcast, where he interviews struggling artists like Sir Paul McCartney, and a man who literally wrote the book on House. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Simon Barber. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's great to
nice
have you
to see you both.
Hello, Simon.
And yes, he literally did write the book on House, this incredible tome that came with the Arrow video box set, if anybody has that. So I'm expecting you'll have all the facts we need today.
Oh, I hope so. It's been a while since I wrote that.
And if not, he can show off some of those amazing guitars behind him.
Yes.
It's a
quite an
sickness.
impressive collection. And even more exciting, we have with us one of the creators of House, screenwriter, producer, director, who's worked on such films as Children of the Corn 5, Elfman, and Journey to the Forbidden Valley. But most relevant to today's topic, he's the screenwriter of House and the writer and director of its wonderfully named sequel, House, the Second Story. Hello, sir, to Ethan Wiley. Hello.
Hello, Ethan.
Hello, everybody.
It's really good to have you here. So we have, I'm sure our audience as well will have lots and lots of questions about House and possibly House 2 as well, which I know is a fan favorite. But I thought I would kick off, Ethan, by asking you about the beginnings of your filmmaking career, because I understand it wasn't in writing or directing.
Well, I went to the UCLA Theater and Film School and started off in theater and then moved over to film. It was a 2-year program, so you could only, get there as a junior. And after 1 year in the film program, my father, who was an art teacher, an artist, casually mentioned one day, I have a former student who is a great artist and everything, and he works at this place. I don't know, it's this guy, Lucas guy. And I was like, "You mean Industrial Light and Magic?" yeah, that sounds right. And I said, "Would kind of get his phone number?" He said, "Sure, yeah, he'd love to help you out." And so I called up Mark Thorpe, who was in the model maker at Industrial Light and Magic, and ironically, he also hired my uncle, who is a great artist as well. And my uncle Chuck ended up working in the model department for many, many years on all the big movies. And so Mark Thorpe was helping out Phil Tippett in the monster department on the movie Return of the Jedi, because they were shorthanded. And Mark thought, this will be a fun break from the model making. I'll go over there. And so he got me in the door. And my first job was literally sweeping the floors of the monster department. It was actually entering the second unit filming. The first unit had already filmed. But the second unit, of course, on Return of the Jedi was huge. It's still the biggest movie I was ever close to. I mean, it was a monstrous production. I mean, just huge. And so the creature people were like all up on the location, and there was hardly anybody in the shop. So just someone said, like, you got to clean up this mess they left behind. So I'm literally cleaning up. And then the next minute they're going, hey, we need an extra hand. We need you to make Ewok feet. I was like, sounds great. So I started, they gave me the feet and the fur to put on them. They showed me how to do it. And so I'm making all these Ewok feet because they were going through them really fast as they're running around the mountains, and they're tearing these things up. And so they need more Ewok feet. So, and the next Hollywood glamour. Hey, we need you to drive up to Eureka, California, which is about, I don't know how many, 5-hour drive or something, on the very far northwestern corner of California, up in the redwood trees up there. Biggest trees in the world are up there. And they said, we need you. And so I hopped in my car and drove up there to deliver the Ewok feet. And when I got there, like, don't leave. We need more help here. And so I was an Ewok wrangler. Yeah, I mean, so being another guy named Kirk Thatcher, and Kirk later went on to do a lot of the Jim Henson productions, directing a lot of those movies and TV shows and things. And Kirk was younger than I was. I was maybe 20, 21. Kirk was younger. He was 18 or something, barely out of high school, and a brilliant artist. He shows up later when he happens to design all the creatures for House.
Okay.
Wow.
Big Ben and all those designs are Kirk's designs. So Kirk Thatcher and I were basically the Ewok wranglers, and helping out, the stunt Ewoks and all that kind of stuff. So it was Kirk and me and 25 little people running around in the mountains there, and it was a good way to start a movie career, I guess. It's been downhill since then, but that's how I got my start. And then after that was over, Chris Walas was leaving, and he'd worked on Return of the Jedi. He'd helped design the Ewoks. He was going to start his own company, but he wanted to keep it in Northern California. And so I got on as his employee number one, his assistant. And I still didn't know much about special effects, but he and I just had a similar sense of humor. And I think he liked the fact that I was interested in filmmaking beyond just the special effects, but I really wanted to write and direct. And I think he had, those ambitions too, kind of. And so we just got along really well. And he was willing to kind of teach me. It's such a specialized field that it's better sometimes to just teach from scratch how to do some of these things rather than someone else comes in with preconceived ideas, And on Gremlins, there was actually like people there with PhDs in puppetry and things,
Oh, wow.
And when it came time to audition for performing the Gremlins, I'd done a lot of comedy acting and stand up, and I did lots of character type stuff. That was kind of my thing. And I happened to be good at doing a double take with a gremlin, and I had that kind of the comic timing they were looking for. So I ended up being one of the major puppeteers on Gremlins. And the guys with the PhDs, it was funny because they were so good at what they do that the puppet would go, and they would go, no, that isn't. So I stepped in and cut in line and got to do a lot of the puppeteering.
So whenever we see a double take in Gremlins, it's you.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
And whenever you see the interpretive dance, then it's not you.
We had some fun times on that movie. I mean, there's pictures of it somewhere where we were doing the one that's like in the blender, and then she runs and turns it on and spins around, and I was underneath puppeteering, and by the time this thing's, I had to have like slickers on. So it's just like the whole thing was just like drenched in green. I was drenched in green goo. But yeah. And we had a lot of good times on that movie.
That sounds like it.
I spent 2 years on that film.
You make this sound very glamorous for Hollywood. The Ewok feet, the gremlin blood. Underneath
the set at Warner Brothers in an old studio, rats running by, Yeah, it's glamorous, all right. So that's how I got my start. And then with House, we'll get more into the details, or at least Simon can, because he knows it better than I do. But I was able to kind of parlay that experience with the special effects to kind of help assemble this effects team and get Kirk Thatcher, to do the designs. I mean, Kirk, was completely unknown, so to speak, but I knew what an incredible artist and talent he was. So I got him the gig to design, the witch and the Big Ben and a lot of the characters for House. And then of course Chris Walas ended up designing the creatures for House 2.
Wow. Yeah. So going back to the concept for House, I understand it began as a story outline from a different filmmaker, and then you came on board, and I think the tone of it changed slightly with your contribution. So how did that come about, and what was your inspiration for your approach?
That's a good question. Yes, some of your fans may know the name Fred Decker, who did Night of the Creeps and Monster Squad later. Fred and I ended up, by total coincidence, becoming roommates at UCLA. And it turned out we lived a couple miles from each other, and we had gone to the high schools next to each other here in Marin County. I'd never met. And so it was just kind of a bizarre coincidence. And so we became, quick friends, and we started doing shooting little short films and things, student films. And then I left school to go work on Return of the Jedi, and then it ended up being this, over a 2-year thing. And so now that I had kind of some special effects knowledge and connections and things and things, we talked about doing a haunted house film at his parents' home in San Rafael here in Marin County. And they had a beautiful 2-story Victorian house, and we thought, hey, I can get some creatures together, and Fred will direct, and we'll just do this like a super low budget on our own kind of thing. And so Fred wrote an outline. I forget how long it was. Simon could tell you the page count.
15 pages.
See, he knows. He knows. And it was the basic kind of concept of this guy going into this haunted house, or, a house to kind of deal with his inner demons, so to speak. And, by the time he emerges from the house, 2 hours later, it's the most harrowing, terrifying experience anyone's ever had in their lives, kind of thing. But Fred got a job for the director, Steve Miner, writing I think one of the first attempts to remake Godzilla, especially in America. And so he was busy working on that project. And we still were, we want to try to do this low budget thing in case we totally fail in Hollywood. And so I said, well, let me take a crack at writing a script while you're working on that. And then, when you're done, and then maybe we can get back to making our little movie. And so I wrote the script. Fred was lukewarm at best because I'd put the the Ethan Wiley's personal touch, which now is this totally whacked out, crazy film with a lot of goofy humor in it. And so he, I mean, I think he recognized it was an entertaining script. It just wasn't quite what he had been envisioning. But he said, "Oh, I'll give it to Steve and, see," because I didn't have an agent. I don't know if Fred had an agent at that time. Maybe he did, but we didn't, we hardly had any connections in the business. And next thing I know, Godzilla's been kind of put on hold or is struggling with his financing. And Steve calls me up, says, "I want to do this and do it like right away." And before we knew it, we had a green light and to make House. And so again, I kind of used some of my connections, a couple of people who'd worked on Gremlins, Brent Baker, Kirk Thatcher, Barney Berman was also on that crew. Later went on to a fantastic career doing makeup effects. And so, yeah, then it was just still a low budget production. And then Sean Cunningham, the producer of the Friday the 13th movies, who'd worked with Steve Miner on the sequels, came in to produce and raise the money. And we went around to all the major studios. They all rejected it. I think kind of because, this movie can't decide what it is, that kind of, they just want the genres to be very narrow and clear cut, and anything that strays outside the margins scares them, so.
I feel like this would be a long elevator pitch of a movie.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of layers there.
Yeah. And I think it was just, it was a little different than especially of the trends of the time. And so, as I recall, Sean Cunningham put his own money up to start the production, start the building of the sets and the stuff. So, I mean, he took great risk doing that, but that's what convinced New Line that, yeah, we'll come on board. I mean, it's all the trains leaving the station, and they were kind of desperate for, something exciting and something, a new movie. And so the timing, all that kind of, got really lucky and worked out. And that's how House came to be. Yeah.
Nice. Well, you mentioned New Line Cinema. I feel like they had a lot of.
I'm sorry, not New Line, New World.
New World, yeah.
I always get the two confused. Yeah.
Yeah, and I that's exactly who I meant, but I said New Line just like you did. So, but New World Cinema, they made Dead Heat that we did.
That's right.
And also movies like Vamp and things like that were kind of like what you just said, where movie executives they want to clear cut. This is what this is, and those movies are kind of genre bending a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it did Roger Corman's company, and anyone into low budget old horror stuff knows the name Roger Corman. But it had kind of expanded into a larger company at that point, and I think they were, it's just a different time in the business where they were kind of a minor, group compared to the big studios competing for talent and all that kind of stuff. So they kind of stumbled upon us, and when the film was first test marketed, the first screenings, it didn't do really great, and there was a lot of concern. And again, I think just because those test screenings are very haphazard, and people's expectations going in, and so many things that affect that. But when it was released, it was huge for that time. I mean, it basically tied Pretty in Pink for being the #1 film in the country. That was a big, John Hughes comedy from Paramount or somebody, or Universal, I forget, and here's this movie no one had heard of, nobody knew anything about. It's, and it just did gangbusters. Now, the only problem, and one of the lessons you learn quickly, is I remember we went down to Hollywood to see it the first night, and it's packed, audience is going crazy. It just couldn't have been a more, fun experience. And then, okay, we're going back the second weekend, and it's like, it's been moved to the little theater upstairs, and there's a new movie in downstairs, and there's 10 people watching some dumb new movie, and upstairs it's packed in the little theater, and you're like, well, I remember, I think I went to the manager. This is how young I was. I went to the manager and said, "Why is House up in the little thing?" And he's like, "Well, it's just a contractual thing. We had a book for 1 week, and then it goes out." He says, "Yeah, it's a big drag because that's selling out, and we've got this turkey here in the big theater. and you just learn that, you know, as a smaller company, they didn't have the clout to hold the theater, you know. So I think House would have had even bigger numbers, far bigger numbers, if it had been a larger, you know, release by studio that could have booked that studio time or whatever.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So it's a good point to bring in Simon, because with your study on the genre, I wonder where you think House sits in the lineage of horror comedy in the 80s.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, obviously, as Ethan said, Sean Cunningham had he produced Wes Craven's Last House on the Left back in the 70s, and then there's Friday the 13th, which he produced and directed, and that sort of cycle of slasher films had become quite popular by that point, hadn't it? And obviously Halloween in the late 70s really took that to another level, I think. So for every Halloween or Friday the 13th, you probably had 20 other kind of lesser movies doing a similar thing. And I'm sure that
Saturday the 14th, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that there was definitely an opportunity there to do something that was going to have a slightly different feel. Although horror comedy was pretty well established by that point as well. It's not like it was a totally new concept to mix those things. I mean, you could go way back, couldn't you, to the 1920s and find Harold Lloyd films that did that. But you know, it did come into its own as a genre, I think, in the early 80s with things like American Werewolf in London. And as Ethan mentioned, you had Gremlins and you had Ghostbusters, and I think Reanimator and Fright Night and other films had been out before House. So audiences completely understood that, I think.
Those are definitely influences, by the way, on House. I mean, those films.
Sure. Yeah. And when I was doing the research for that book on House, I did turn up an article in Fangoria where they were actually previewing the film, and the headline for that article was "Not Just Another Horror Comedy." So I think it actually, people making those films were looking for ways to keep horror comedies interesting by that point as well. So you know, it was interesting, but I think House, because it's such a varied movie, it kind of aligned itself with other subgenres as well, like the haunted house movie, films like Amityville Horror and The Changeling and Poltergeist, I suppose. And then it's got, you know, the sort of the Vietnam vet sub theme to it as well. And there, in the 1980s, there were plenty of movies about Vietnam, and the rubberness of the monsters, if you like, spoke to a certain type of heightened reality, which I think some film critics thought was a particular type of film as well. So yeah, it fell into lots of interesting categories. I suppose overall, I see it as part of a lineage between movies like Critters and Night of the Creeps and Evil Dead 2 and Beetlejuice and those sorts of films. If you're into that sort of stuff, I think House would probably fall quite easily into that, you know, lineage.
Well, one thing, you know, that as I recall, I hadn't seen Evil Dead. And was Evil Dead 2, did it come out right before or right after House? I'm not sure.
Evil Dead
87, I think.
Yeah.
After.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so some people kind of asked, like, you know, was there some connection or something? Because they sometimes kind of compare those two movies. And I wasn't aware of those films at all. And of course, you know, when I saw Evil Dead 2, I loved it, you know. That was right up my alley. But those were the films that I kind of think of right at around that time. That again were blending the horror and the things. I think it's for me, you know, it was definitely, you know, a kind of a throw everything in the kitchen sink. Both movies are kind of like that, you know, like tons of ideas. Let's see if we can get them all in the movie. But you know, but the other side of it was that the Vietnam underpinnings, the more dramatic story of, you know, House. You know, I read and researched, you know, on Vietnam. I hadn't been in war. I'd seen war movies, but there was the production, the special effects producer, Rick Brophy, I believe his name was. He had been in Vietnam. And when early on in shooting, he came up to me and he said, "I just want you to know that I really appreciate the way you wrote those scenes," or something. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, that's what it was like. You really have really nailed it. And I was very proud of that because I'd done a lot of work and research on that. So at the same time, there's a lot of silliness going on. As a writer, you want to take a topic like that, and even though it's in this goofy horror film, you don't want to just spew, movie cliches or stuff. And anyway, so I was taken aback. I had no idea that he would, and say like, I actually was getting chills watching it. Yeah, I mean, reading it, like it was kind of connecting with him. And so I always was proud of that moment that he'd acknowledged that rang true to him, kind of those scenes. Like, wow.
Well, I was going to say, that's one of my favorite, that's my lens that I watch House through, is that you can do it two ways. It's either a linear, like this is what's happening, like what you're seeing on screen is happening, or this is him processing his PTSD and his grief and his over losing his son and his divorce and all of that. And it's fascinating to me because it's almost like a psychological study, and like where he sees his wife as the monster and his regret over what happened with Big Ben. I love watching it that way, like through that camera.
Yeah, and that was me kind of the writing, taking from Fred's original story that had all this intense, heavy stuff, and then really kind of conceptualizing it visually so that, I don't know if we ever say it explicitly, but the concept is that the haunted house preys upon the psychology of the person that comes inside it.
Yep.
And so if someone else with a different set of circumstances in their life came into that house, that it would conjure up a whole different concept of monsters and things like that. And
Yep.
So, in House 2, there's more of a history that ties to the kid's lineage of the grandfather and everything. And it's, kind of opens up portals to the worlds that the ancestor experienced, whatever. So it's a slightly different concept, but
Yep.
But that was kind of the idea when they decided that they weren't going to bring back anybody from the original cast, and so then it became like, well, okay, if we, we're not going to have another actor play, Harold, like, sorry. But so then the concept came of, well, let's make this like an anthology series where each time there's a new adventure in a new house. That was kind of the concept. But after House 2, I was no longer involved in the later, sequels. And so that idea didn't really stick. But that was my concept, was to, have cool new cast, but hold together the anthology with that series of haunted house films. And they could go darker, they could go more comedic. It just kind of depended on the story and the filmmakers involved. That's what I hoped it would become.
And I think House 2, you had a really short schedule in terms of writing that, didn't you? Which is interesting because, as you pointed out, the first movie had been an incredible success. I mean, it was made for $3 million and grossed over 20 internationally, like 19 million domestically, I think. So
yeah, and at that time, it was one of the most successful independent films of all time. I had no idea. I mean, it was like there weren't a lot of independent films that made that kind of money back then.
Yeah, but you had to then produce the screenplay for House 2 in a matter of weeks, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I just remember, that there was success the first one, and sequels weren't so automatic back then. But at a certain point, due to, I don't know, the schedules at the studio or whatever, they're like, okay, we'll fund the sequel, but we need it like, by summer. And I think there's one reason House 2 didn't do as well financially as the first one. Was released in late February, like February 28th or something like that, as I recall. We kind of had the weekend, other than Pretty in Pink, kind of to itself. By the time we did this, House released in the middle of the summer. I mean, it was up against, multiple blockbusters, and it just could not find an audience amidst, Spielberg films, and God knows what was going on that summer. But I just remember it's like, now, okay, we're up against 6 big movies, not just, a John Hughes romantic comedy, and so I think House 2, even though it was softer and not, it's PG-13 and not rated R, I still think that if it had had a weekend, like with a little room, it probably would have done pretty well. So I wrote the draft in 2 weeks, and admittedly, it was I got to fill up 100 pages and come up, some crazy stuff, and again, kind of using what resources were available to me, and so that and I think that it would have helped to have had more time, because the house, I wrote that over a lot of months. I had time to really rewrite and work on it and hone it and everything. And by the time we were shooting, it was a pretty solid little script. But House 2 was a real scramble with the revisions during pre-production, and I just there was not a moment where I wasn't working on the movie there in the preparation. It was either the second you'd be done with the directing meetings, be rushing to computer to revise scenes, and sometimes based on production limitations or whatever.
I did have a question about some of the puppet and the creatures that were in House 2. What did your puppeteering background have anything to do with writing things like the Catter Puppy and the baby pterodactyl and some of the creatures?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and of course, Chris Walas is a genius, even on a low budget, and the creatures, some of those creatures look pretty good in House 2. Absolutely. I knew that, like, the pterodactyl bird is something that we could hand puppeteer, so you design it, instead of having a big full-size pterodactyl, it's going to need stop motion animation running through it. And it's going to be, we knew we could do a puppet and shoot, with it extensively, not as expensively. And the Catter Puppy actually came from a design I created while I was at Chris Wala's. For no film in particular, sometimes we would just do exercises where Chris would have all these young kids that he'd hired to work on Gremlins. Like, okay, guys, let's come up with some designs and work on, and then he'd critique them and talk about, he was such a brilliant guy at integrating. The Gremlins are the perfect synthesis of what Chris Walas does. They look like they almost could be real, but they have tons of personality. And I think was the best designer at doing that of anybody, of blending giving it movie personality, yet make it look like, that might exist in nature, and so we would work on coming up with him. He literally would take us to like the aquarium to go and look at the fish and talk about the structures and the designs and the ways you look at building and designing a creature from your imagination, yet that still has the properties of something real. So the Catter Puppy came out of that, and then he, put on that puppy face. Mine looked more like a kind of real caterpillar, and so so that's how the Catter Puppy came to be. It was kind of a combination of my original design and Chris's improvements of it.
I think in an alternate world, the Catter Puppy would have been like the Baby Yoda of 1987.
Yeah.
He has an incredible range of skills, Chris Walas, though, doesn't he? I think he did the melting face of the Nazi in Raiders of the Lost Ark, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and that's kind of where he started to get attention. He'd worked on a bunch of low-budget movies like Humanoids from the Deep, and I'm trying to think of what else, and also some of the early Cronenberg movies, Videodrome, the exploding head in Videodrome. I don't know if you remember that scene, but at that time, that was such a good effect. Like, people were like, how did they possibly do that? It looks like that guy's head blows up.
Oh, wait, that was Scanners, right? Scanners,
not Videodrome. You're right. Scanners. Sorry. And so, later talking to Chris, like, how did you do that? And he said, well, I did 40 different tests and finally came up with just a 12-gauge shotgun, It's a backing behind it. They just literally blew that up. Chris just had such an excellent knowledge of filmmaking. Because, when I was working on Gremlins, there's a lot of young people on the thing, but sometimes these special effects experts, the reason they're so good at what they do is they're very myopic and focused, and they can just do these incredible mechanical things and design things and, sculpting every scale. I was more like, well, you don't need to put all the scales on the underneath part of the tail, because the camera's never going to see that. So don't do that. Like, skip that part. And they'd be like, oh, right. And I think I kind of ended up with a little semi-managerial role because I could kind of communicate with Joe Dante and Mike Fennell, the directors, about, what is the camera going to see? What do we really need? And so with that experience, kind of learning from Chris and just my own filmmaking experience, I guess that was something, I've taken in all these low budget movies I've done is, you do just enough to convince the camera of what it is. Don't do anything more, because it's precious resources you're usually dealing with. And so both the house movies were like that. What you see on the screen is pretty much everything. There's not much that ends up on the cutting room floor because you can't afford it. You don't have an unlimited budget to go and do reshoots. I mean, on House 2, I did 0 reshoots, nothing. And that's almost unheard of in a film. I'm not proud of that fact. It needed reshoots, but most of the films, especially after that, knowing, you're going to get reshoots, don't worry, but just keep filming. And then later you're told, change our mind. It's good enough. I was always obsessed with making sure that the script, was there's no fat, there's going to be no scenes that ended up on the cutting room floor. And then that way you maximize your budget to put it on the screen.
It's interesting you mentioned reshoots because I understand originally the ending of House was slightly different, and I think you had to reshoot part of that. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, the end was reshot. Simon, do you remember why?
Yeah, well, there's an original draft of the script which came with that arrow set, which I painstakingly scanned. I think Ethan probably sent me that. And Roger Cobb was called Roger Gladstone in the original draft. And really? And toward Jimmy, his son, had drowned in the movie. He was not recoverable, and
wow.
And it was more about Roger's kind of problem with his past and Ben and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But there was going to be a scene where Roger had to fight a monster in a pool, or I think there was a scene with the son in the pool, and they went to a YMCA and tried to film it with black water or black curtains or something like that, and it just terrified the child, and it didn't work out, and so they had to just kind of reconceive the ending, apparently.
Yeah, that's right. I'm remembering that now. Yeah, and I think you're right. It didn't have the happy ending, and again, probably staying true to Fred's dark, harrowing, horrible vision, and it was definitely a good idea to reshoot, with the happy ending. So that was not one of those, the studio's forcing us in a happy ending. We're like, oh yeah, that's better. Yeah. But that's funny. I forgot about that YMCA. Yeah. One of the wonderful things for me on House, which is a rare opportunity for writers, is that Steve Miner was always very open, very collaborative. And I basically was the writer on the set. And I think also because of my effects expertise, so to speak, I could kind of give input into production in other ways, but I would sneak up to Steve and whisper in his ear, like the line reading, is supposed to be a little different, to get the laugh kind of thing. And he'd listen to me and then, a little bit next take, he'd make an adjustment with the actor, and then boom, the line would be there. And so I think he welcomed that collaboration, and then directors don't often like because they're afraid they're going to be usurped by the writer sneaking around behind their back saying to the actor, don't do it the way he's saying. That's, and of course I knew better than that and was totally respectful, and would only give him communications when I knew it was something I could do quietly and privately, where, it wasn't like, the writer's trying to assert his ego on the set, and so it was a wonderful collaboration in that way, and something that's very rare. So I always like to point that out, and I think it was good for the production, because he could, and Joe Dante was the same way. I mean, now that I think about it, Joe is always totally open to ideas and things. We actually had T-shirts made up that said, "Thank you, no," and that was Joe, as open as Joe would be, and of course he needed to be this way as the director. But you go, hey, what if a gremlin were to swing on a chandelier? And you go, thank you, no. Or you go, what if a gremlin was on a skateboard? He's, I love that. Let's do that, And so he was always really open to ideas. And at one point we even had like a chalkboard or a whiteboard or something where anyone in the crew could write down ideas like what would be a fun thing for Gremlin to do, and then we look at them and go, hey, that one's good, and everything. So I was very lucky on the first couple movies I worked on that had directors that were so collaborative and open to input and things. Yeah. And I always tried to be that way, when I was directing.
So in terms of if you had an opportunity to work with the actors, I think I'd like to show a clip to show the one of my favorite interactions between the two main characters in House, and then we can talk a little bit about the casting and the dynamic that you wrote for these two characters here.
Hey, it's great to have a new neighbor. Woman lived here before you was nuts. Biggest bitch under the sun. Just a senile old hag, really. Wouldn't be surprised if someone just got fed up and offed her, you know what I mean? She was my aunt. Heart of gold, though.
It never gets old.
Yeah.
So it's a great dynamic. It's kind of a buddy comedy. How did you find the right actors for this, for the balance of tones here, who would play off each other like that?
Well, take a step back. The Harold character, played by George Wendt, was definitely like an added thing, I think, because I just, the character needed someone to bounce off of, and because Roger's going through such, intense, harrowing psychological torment, I just thought it would be funny to have, the kind of comic relief of this neighbor. But also part of it was how I would, in a lot of these situations, you find a lot of humor just the way people would really respond to things. And I thought it'd be fun to, if you see something crazy, a lot of times these movies, they don't tell anybody. And I always thought my first instinct would be like, grab the neighbor. You got to come see this, you got, this thing came out of the closet. I want someone else to see it too, to say I'm not crazy. And so that's kind of how that dynamic was developed. And so during casting, which again, I was able to sit in on all the casting and give feedback on that. And Cheers was a big TV show at that time, the number one show, maybe, like comedy on TV. And in came George Wendt. And, and his line delivery, the way he's not hamming it up there, right? He's the opposite. He just goes super deadpan with those lines that are from the original script. And instead of making, oh my God, she's the biggest bitch, he just does it real flat, and it was it just was so perfect. And then the quick response with the Heart of Gold, he just got the droll sense of humor, and that if he were to go way over the top, hamming it up, it'd be competing with all the other craziness, So he just had those great natural instincts to know, no, I just need to deadpan this, and it's going to be hilarious. And so, I'm trying to think of the other casting. I mean, part of the thing is we couldn't afford movie stars. So you try to get someone who had some kind of name recognition, and all the, major cast members in House, all came from popular TV shows. Big Ben, Richard Mull, he was on Night Court, which is another popular, comedy at that time. And so, that was kind of the realm that we could afford, was to get TV people maybe on the off season, when they're not filming, to come in and do a little movie during the summertime kind of thing. And then John Ratzenberger in House 2, it's a total coincidence that he happened to be the other barfly. I used to joke that in House 3 we're going to have Rhea Perlman, be the sidekick. And then so when John came in, he just has that wonderful blue collar kind of thing. He just knows those kind of guys really well and knows how to play them. Never mind the fact that he's in Star Wars, right? Is it Star Wars that he's in, the original?
Empire Strikes Back.
Pilots,
Yeah.
And so one of the things he had to do this fighting, and we're thinking we're going to get some kind of old schlubby guy who's not going to be good at the fighting scenes. And so he said, so John, how do you feel about some of these action scenes? And he said, well, I studied stage combat with the Royal Shakespeare, Academy, in England. I've done all that stuff. We're like, what? you know how to do sword fighting? Yeah, of course. I did all that stage combat stuff. And turned out he was all, you know, there's no stunt doubles in his scene. He's doing all that, you know. He knew how to do a punch. I mean, you're like, well, this is too good that this guy has these skills. So he was, you know, perfect for the role. So we cast him laughingly, going like, people are going to think we have anything about casting the barflies from Cheers and House movies.
Well, he steals,
you know,
that movie.
he steals the movie, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
When he pulls that sword out, like that movie goes into like 6th gear. It's like, what?
Yeah. And so and also he was driving the production crazy because he would improvise, and I loved him, and I love the, you know, I'd come from improv comedy, so of course I love this stuff, and all the script supervisors and me be like, he's changed, he didn't do what he did last time. I go, look, it's comic gold, shut up, just let him do his thing, you know, we'll figure out continuity later, don't stop him, you know. And every time he'd do a different take with a different line, or, you know, some funny thing, and somehow we cut it all together, so it makes sense.
Well, I love his when he's inspecting the wall, the hole in the wall, or whatever. He's like, what you got here is an interdimensional type thing. And I mean, my day job is I do service work in houses, so it's when I think back on that now, it's like that's basically what we do every day. It's like, well, let's see, what do you got here? And all of a sudden I'm that character.
Well, yeah, I mean
without the sword
comes from, you know, whenever an electrician opens up a wall, they always find shit that you're hoping they never, you know, like, what? It's going to cost how much now? You know, well, look at this and look at this. And so I thought, what would be more expensive than finding an alternate universe that has to be dealt with, you know?
That was always one of the things that's really attracted me to House as a kid, I think, is that you had this kind of one character, one location premise, but then as soon as he goes through that bathroom cabinet, you've got this whole other world to explore, and that was so appealing as a kid, you know, the fact that you could expand that to such a creative way, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and that was again the low budget concept, you know, is one location, and this originally came from Fred and I talking, you know, it was like one location, we set up, we can do the things there, but then the expansion was, you know, that we could drape a room in black and have the guy coming down on a rope, and it's a little bit like you know, Time Bandits, you know, has that scene. I don't know if that was before or after.
It was before,
House, but Terry Gilliam also had an excellent sense of how to create a visual world with very low, you know, budget stuff. Let's get some guys in robes and put cow skulls on top, you know, like, and you go, that's kind of goofy, but it's also really cool, you know. And so that was definitely, you know, part of the idea was that, yeah, you, with your creativity, you can come up with some good visual concepts that appear much bigger than what they really are, you know.
Yeah, it definitely expanded the scope of both films.
Yeah, and it also gave you the opportunity. I mean, the other thing I would say to people is the concept of House is that when a door opens, either something terrifying or hilarious is going to happen, and part of the tension is the audience trying to guess what it might be. Like, is this going to scare me, or is this going to be really funny? You know, and that tension, and also that the possibilities of, yeah, you open this door and you might be in a prehistoric world with dinosaurs. You know, you might, who knows what's going to happen. And I think as a filmmaker over the years, the worst thing a filmmaker can do is be boring.
Yep.
And so say, I don't know if my movies are any good or not, but they're not boring. You know?
Okay, I just want to bring in, we've been getting some excellent comments. I just want to bring in a few of those for a moment. Jason Anderson says, I remember seeing this VHS at the rental place and being irrationally scared of the zombie hand in the door, but loving the movie. I think many of us came to this one through the VHS rental store.
Right.
Drew G says, I couldn't go in my closet and was afraid of the toilet for a long time. Eddie Coulter says, House is one of those hidden gems from the 80s. I wore out my VHS from watching it all the time as a kid. We have King Eric the Greatest of All. I have a new saying for trying to complete a difficult task. It's like wrangling Ewoks.
Very good.
Tokyo Toy Bastard. So you're saying that House happened because Godzilla USA didn't? That's fantastic. And finally, I've always loved the design of the War Demon. I've always wondered if I'm seeing things correctly. Are the ends of the fingers M16 cartridges?
They're certainly bullets, yeah.
Yeah, large bullets, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the concept there, and I believe this is from an original Kirk Thatcher drawing, you know, what we talked about was that it's an amalgam of napalmed bodies, you know, the melted kind of figures and rib cages and things you see, and that it's this kind of weird amalgam of all sorts of, there's a good picture of it. Being this kind of nightmare grotesque creature that kind of that encompasses all the horror of Vietnam.
It's almost like a big melted mass grave is what it looks like.
That was kind of the napalmy, you know, thing that we associate with.
Well, one of the comments just then was talking about the skeleton zombie finger on the door for the poster. And both this movie and House 2, I always remember the taglines from the posters. And the first one being, one of them was "Ding dong, you're dead." And I remember seeing that as a kid and being like, that's the most clever thing I've ever seen in my life. And the second one was "Frightening strikes twice."
Well, I don't know if Simon can chime in on this, but as I recall, that poster like won some awards and things for like best movie poster. It was, you know, very well received because it was so clever. My only gripe was that when House 2 came out, they were so enamored with their award-winning poster that they basically just recreated it with a slight subtle variation on House 2. And I had people coming up to me saying, "Hey, I see that your movie's getting re-released. House." No, it's the sequel. It's House 2. Oh, really? I thought it was the first film. And look, you know, I thought, oh, this isn't good. You know, like everybody thinks it's just the same film again. Because they're not, you know, looking close. They just see that big image, you know, that graphic image. And so
do you think that played into why House 2 didn't do as well? Maybe did people have that kind of confusion?
I don't know. I just know that me, like the first 3 people who saw it all said, "Oh, your first film is coming out again." And I thought, this isn't good. You know, I would have had, you know, the zombie cowboy, you know, or something, you know, more, you know, but that's not my role. Someone else's job to try to recreate the exact same thing they did before. You know? So
I think Slim was scarier than Big Ben, even though you see a lot more of Big Ben in the first movie. I think Slim was pretty frightening.
Yeah, Slim was a cool concept. You know, one of the you know, the things as a filmmaker, sometimes you have trouble watching your own films because you see all the things that could have been and that you didn't get. And Slim was one where our budget was so tight that we couldn't have him talk.
Yep.
Like, so we can do a mask, but we can't do a talk. It's too, you know, it's going to cost a lot more to have the whole prosthetic thing. So I had to, instead of him, you know, with all these great lines I'd written for, you know, suddenly the character couldn't talk. And I think it really hurt the film, you know. But you get into these corners, you know, as a filmmaker, and you, okay, you know, he doesn't talk. Okay, I'll figure it out, you know. But the design with the long Willie Nelson red hair, that was Chris Whala's. I mean, I don't think I had a description like that in the original script. And I remember seeing his first designs and just going, oh my God, this is so good. You know?
Yep.
Because that's, again, Chris's genius to think up a strong character thing like that, where I just don't think other designers would have come up with that idea, you know?
Yep.
I just thought it was so brilliant design.
Yeah, his whole aesthetic was like if Wild Bill Hickok was from hell or something.
Yeah. And the skeleton horse, you know, that he rides, you know, that was all fun stuff. And
even the voiceover that they gave him, it was just, you know, like the ADR or whatever. But I could be wrong, but I think it was Frank Welker doing his. He's got that. He's used that same kind of a demon voice in a lot of different properties. But even that kind of helped.
Simon, in your book, do you get into Frank Welker at all?
I think it's mentioned. Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
have to go back and read the House 2 chapter, but I do think it's mentioned.
Frank Welker, yeah, what an interesting guy. You know,
Yeah.
Frank Welker at that time was like, and afterward, if you saw an animated movie and they have all the stars that you recognize, like, oh, so and so played the voice of so and so, then right below them is Frank Welker, and this guy just could do anything with his voice. He would do like a tape machine rewinding, and then you know the you know, I mean, he would do all of that and make it sound just like. So he would do all the creature voices from Cat or Puppy to whatever, and I guess we had him do Slim too. And I remember that at the time, I don't quote me on these numbers, but it was something like, so how much does this guy get paid? It's like $6,000 a week or a day or something, and I was just like, oh my God. And then you add up like, okay, well, we can bring him in for a day and he'll do every sound effect in the movie that we need, every creature effect, or we can build it from scratch with sound editors. It'll take them weeks and cost way more. So, okay, let's see what Frank Welker can do. And then of course he just like nails it all. Boom, boom, boom. Nicest guys. You're sitting there with his bagel. Hey, great to meet you, Ethan. See you later. And so, going off to his ranch in Malibu, where he's just making so much money doing the silly voices. And I remember thinking back to, that kid in the back of class that was always good at making all the, and it's like, he's just, working at a gas station somewhere. And if he only had gone to Hollywood, he could have been a millionaire.
Yep. Yeah, he's the Michael Jordan of voice actors. I mean, he's just legendary.
Yeah. And the nicest guy you'll ever meet. Just great.
Well, speaking of sound elements, I was wondering if we'd like to talk about Henry Manfredini's contribution to these films, because just like the director of House, probably looking for a bit of a genre shift from the Friday the 13th movies where he made his name.
Yeah. I mean, Harry had come up with that iconic
cello.
What do you call it? Jingle. And for the Friday the 13th movies, and Sean saw his collaboration with Harry a little bit, like Spielberg and John Williams. He's like, this is my guy. He does all my movies. This is my signature. And Ethan, your ideas of who should be the composer out, because it's Harry is going to be your guy. And I actually think that Harry's best score is House 2. I think that he really wove in the Western themes and came up with some really nice melodies. And I mean, I think House is great and does exactly what it should do and all that. But I really thought that House 2 stretched Harry's abilities and that he really did a fine job with House 2.
Yeah, I always loved the score to House, and I agree. I think House 2 does go a whole stage further, doesn't he, in incorporating those Western elements. It makes it really, really pop. But I mean, my first encounter with the music from House was obviously that cello that just opens,
Right.
That 2-note theme that he has, and it's just so perfect for
Yeah.
setting the scene, isn't it? And of course, later as the score develops, he incorporates so much more in terms of synthesizers and bleeps and bloops. And when Roger gets into the netherworld side of things, it gets even more synthetic, which actually makes me think of Stranger Things, which came up in the comments there. It's very much that kind of texture, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and those are good points about the House score. The upside down from Stranger Things seems like it was taken from House. Stranger Things, I only saw season 1, and of course it has that great nostalgia for that kind of 80s sci-fi adventure horror stuff, down to the to the graphics, which remind me almost of like a House graphics, the kind of that era of the design. But we were talking about Harry. Yeah, and I'm not sure. I don't think I was at the scoring for House, so I don't know if did he have a small orchestra for that, or was it more just the synthesizers and other elements? I'm not sure. I think he probably had a small orchestra for some of the stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely some strings in there. Whether they were overdubbed or not, I'm not sure. But
Yeah. Well, House 2, there was a, like 40 type piece orchestra, as I recall. And that was my first time in a scoring session, with studio musicians. And I remember, because I played a little music myself, and just watching how he's interacting. He's in the booth with the headphones, and he's got the score, and he's talking, to the orchestra in the large room. And he'd be, okay, go to number 43, we're going to do this. And I remember seeing the lead violinist, first chair. He's sitting there with a sandwich and he's chatting with the woman next to him was the second violin. And they're like, yeah, and he's saying, like, tap, tap. And I'm thinking, the guy's still holding a sandwich. Like, down goes the sandwich, up comes the violin. Boom, perfect. First take. Okay, on to cue number 44. And I was just like, oh my God, these guys are unbelievable. And the violinist, who was just doing such an extraordinary job, beautiful tone and just playing beautifully. I said, who is that violinist? He's a monster. This guy's amazing. He said, oh, that's Sid Page. I said, who's Sid Page? It sounded kind of familiar. He said, oh, he was the violinist with Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks, which was the 70s band from Marin County. Brilliant songwriter, Dan Hicks. And I was like, oh, okay. That guy knows how to play anything, right? Because that was kind of swing jazz, pop swing jazz. And here he's doing a classical thing or a Western thing or whatever. And he's a legendary guy now, Sid Page. But I remember that was my first experience seeing how talented those people are at their jobs. And yeah, so that's Sid Page playing those beautiful violin lines in House 2.
Nice.
Wow. So we mentioned Joe Dante early, obviously in relation to Gremlins. And I was just thinking that he does have an interesting cameo in House. I think this is a trivia area for Simon to expand on.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so in the movie, the character of Aunt Elizabeth is an artist, and she has this sort of surrealist artwork that's placed around the house. There's one in the garage, which is actually an important kind of plot point, and then there's some on the stairway, which the grocery boy sees at the beginning of the movie, and then in the room with the closets, there's some paintings on the wall there. And the main painting that was in the garage, I think, was done by William Stout, but he was also working on that Godzilla 3D project, and so didn't really have enough time. So he handed off the artwork, the paintings, to an artist called Richard Hescox, who's a very popular fantasy artist, very accomplished fantasy artist, and he did the rest of the paintings for that character. And so at one point, if you look in the background of the scene where they've got all the video cameras up and the film in the closet, you see an image of a person being speared by a marlin. And Richard Hescox told me that that's actually supposed to be director Joe Dante being speared by a marlin. So
Right.
That's an excellent little bit of trivia.
Because I've had some other cameos and things for a second. I was like, wait, Joe's in House? And, oh, right, in the painting, yeah.
And there's interestingly, when I first got interested in House, I actually went to Richard Hescox's website and found that he was selling one of the original paintings from the house, the one that's in the hallway where the cops come in and they look up and Roger says, my aunt was an artist, and the cop says, I guess. Yeah. And it's an image of a woman being attacked by garden tools, which is kind of a theme that happens in the movie. And I've got that painting here.
Oh, my God.
That's the original painting
Wow.
that hangs on the hall. Sorry for the sort of X-rated content there, but yeah, that's the painting that hangs in the hall in the house. So.
Right. Yeah. And then the marlin, of course, comes to life on the wall later. Yeah. So there's those, the hints of things that come in all the paintings.
And that predated the talking Billy Bass things from the late 90s too.
That's right. I know. I should have patented that idea. And then cameos in House 2. There are some actual cameos in the scene where the cops come to shoot at the end and are shooting into the house and shooting Slim and all that. When the cops arrive, the three of the cops are played by Chris Walas, producer Stuart Kornfeld, God rest his soul. He left us, I guess, maybe a year ago. And Stuart Kornfeld produced The Fly, and also Elephant Man, and later became Ben Stiller's producer.
Oh, okay.
And I wrote some scripts for Stuart that never made it to the big screen. But so Stuart and Chris, and then Jim Isaac, my childhood friend that I got onto the crew for Gremlins. Actually, he also worked at ILM. I needed help sweeping up the shop, so I got Jimmy in the help there. And then Jim was kind of the effects supervisor. He was still working for Chris. And they had a couple of projects, I think, going on simultaneously. So he was the kind of on-set supervisor of the effects. And then he later did second unit directing for me on Children of the Corn 5. But Jim Isaac, he actually got a close-up because he was a good-looking kid and he had some acting experience. And so he was a good actor. And we had done a lot of theater together and things. So anyway, there's a few fun cameos there. And then Jim Isaac directed House 3 slash what was the original title of House 3?
The Horror Show.
The Horror Show. He directed The Horror Show, and then did special effects for the underwater creature movie that Sean directed.
Deep Star 6?
Deep Star 6.
Deep Star 6.
Yeah, and he did the effects for that, and then also directed Jason X, the 10th of the Friday the 13th series. So he continued working with Sean on some of those films.
Jason in space.
Yes, and for you trivia lovers, I did the end credits music for Jason X.
Oh, nice.
So, which was a 6-minute cue. Because the effects are so long, so the BMI residuals have been fantastic. So I have over almost 7 minutes of music in the movie. Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, so Jim also he passed away a few years ago, tragically, and but yeah, he and I worked a lot together, and he had a lot to do with House 2 and other films.
So I'll just say at this point that we're in the final third of our live stream here. So if anybody watching has any questions they'd like to throw into the pot, please do put them in the comments section, and we'll put those to our special guests. One thing I wanted to touch on in relation to the first House movie is the location, the house itself, which is almost a character unto itself. Where actually is the house in-house?
It's in Monrovia, California. Simon, did you go visit it when you came to LA that time?
I did, yeah. In 2010, I did a kind of a road trip across America, and I went to the house, and the current owners were very obliging and let me have a look around. Obviously, the interiors were done on a soundstage, but the external part of the house looks incredible. And I got to do that circuit sort of round the garden as the camera does at the beginning of the movie and up that pathway. And it all looked pretty much the same as it did, and it was fantastic. And so they let us go inside and come out onto the sort of exterior roof areas and have a look out. So I was really close to the front of the house, and it's just an amazing building. And then we went up into the loft area where they'd set out a cinema, and I was able to watch House in the house from House.
Oh my God.
So yeah,
you win the nerd award of all time. Nobody can top that.
I have a question about that. Is that pool actually a part of that property, or
no,
not? Because it doesn't look like it goes with that house. It's like a grotto.
Right. No, that was faked. We built a fence that was at both locations to kind of connect the two. A couple of things about the house is that Greg Fonseca, who was the production designer on both movies and very talented guy, and he added a lot of adornment, little flourishes to the outside. It was a little bit more, there's these kind of California Victorians, some of them that have all those little details, and others that are kind of more farmhouse classic kind of and a little more plain. And the house, as I recall, was somewhere kind of in between. It had some details, and decorative things, but he wanted to up the gingerbready, kind of feel of the thing. Oh yeah, there's a picture of it. Now, trying to think of what he added. Maybe those little spire things up at the top, right? But he did some kind of things to the exterior, as I recall. And then House 2 is a building down by USC that was a nunnery. I mean, it was like a place for nuns, kind of, or theological kind of thing going on there. And I remember when Greg took me into that house, it was like, you couldn't have designed it better. It just looks exactly, with the kind of Aztec red in a rock and
was that actually there? That wasn't. I thought that was part of like the set design.
That's actually absolutely this house that's right near USC. Yeah, it was. It kind of blew my mind because it was kind of like I couldn't have imagined it anything better than this.
Wow.
So that was really fortuitous. But yeah, Greg Fonseca built the sets for both movies, and the economics of film was different back then. You could get a studio and build big sets on a low budget. You couldn't do that today, and so a lot of money was put into those sets, and yeah, he was a very talented designer, and sometimes took too much of my budget, because I have to have this and I have, but they add to the grand feeling that you're in a bigger budget movie than you are, for sure, and so yeah, that house is still there. Yeah. And Monrovia, by the way, for people who don't know Southern California, it's right near Pasadena. It's just east of Pasadena, so it's kind of up against the hills there in the northern part of that kind of LA basin, and that's where Monrovia is.
Okay. We have a question here for Simon. Did Simon Barber find anything challenging or surprising when he researched the book? And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you came to write this incredible wedge of a book that appears in the box set.
I suppose what was surprising about doing it was that I had to write about all 4 movies, and I was most familiar with the first 2. So finding out things about the third one, which was a really problematic production, was actually quite difficult. And I had to go through commentaries that were on DVDs and sort of dissect things people were saying and then compare it with things I was finding in magazines from the time. And they talked about scenes that were cut and things like that. And I was able to sort of reconstruct it from all of those materials. But yeah, I basically, back in the day, many years ago, I'd known that I loved this movie, but didn't really have any kind of way of pursuing it until I decided that I wanted to learn how to build websites. And so I made a website devoted to the movie as a way of kind of challenging myself to learn how to build websites, really. And then through that process, ended up connecting with people like Ethan and Chris Wayless and Fred Decker and those people. And then because that website just stayed online for like 15 years or whatever it was, Arrow Film and Video, they came to do their house box set at some point and discovered that website and thought, this guy seems like a lunatic. He must know all this stuff about this movie. So they contacted me, and I was able to luckily, because I'd gone on to a career in research and writing and that sort of thing, I was able to combine my incredibly geeky house knowledge with the research side of things and then produce that book for them. So they took a bit of a risk, really, because they honestly had no idea who I was when they said, why don't you write a book for this film?
You got the right guy. Yeah. Oh, I remember when you first contacted me, I got an email and, hey, I'm a fan. And I think you were 20 years old at the time or something?
Probably, yeah.
Very young. And I've done a fan site, I'm just without anybody's permission, but hoping you like it, And I remember opening it up going, what? Oh my God, this is phenomenal. and I think you asked who would have, who would have the rights, and then I think it was Sean Cunningham or something. I said, well, let me talk to Sean, and he was like, "Oh my God, yeah, tell him yes, whatever he needs." So yeah, I mean, there was stuff on the site that, again, like I didn't remember or didn't know. All sorts of cool swag that I never got, that I never saw. Like, what? They made a Caterpillar? No one ever told me.
a lot of that stuff has happened in recent years as well.
Yeah.
You know, because there's so many crafty kind of communities online. They've started making models of those figures and things.
I had the nightlight.
Right.
There's a nightlight that says house on it. It's shaped like a little house, and you plug it in the wall.
Yeah. There's the sort of light up box that came around the time of the movie.
Yeah. Now a lot of that stuff was, they would send out promotional stuff to the distributors and things around the country. And so I got a couple of those things, but yeah, no one gave me like a nice package of here's all our cool stuff.
But fan communities online loved the monsters from the film, and there was a guy called Sam McCain who ran a company called Horror Sanctum Studios. He's no longer with us now, but he actually owned original pieces from House. I think he had a Ben head that was used in the film and things like that. And he made original molds or new molds from those things, and then produced new models, which you can see here, and then painted them and everything, and then began selling them online. And fans loved that and started to acquire kind of modern day versions of the House characters, which was pretty cool too.
Yeah. I know that's a big market. I know that some of the guys, like I think Chris Whale's, sometimes they, like in Japan, there's a big following of that kind of stuff where they'll do like a Chris Whale's signature model of his interpretation of the vampire, or the things like that. In addition to the creatures from the films themselves or whatever. They'll and those become super duper collector items.
Yeah. We had a follow-up question. Where can we get that House book? And that was in the box set.
Yeah, it was only included in that limited edition version of the box set. I think they put another version out later with just the films, so no book. So you'd have to find the one that had the book included.
Yeah, the book is I'll just chime in. Simon did a phenomenal job with that book. I mean, again, I was learning things about the movies, and I go, how do I not know this when I made the two things? And
thank you.
So there's some great stuff in there, and that box set was really, really fantastic. There's a companion documentary, for each film, which I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen yet. I keep meaning to, find a CD player, a DVD player somewhere so I can watch them. So I haven't seen those, but I did interviews and a lot of other people involved did interviews for those documentaries, and just the whole box set with the artwork and the book and everything. It was really a handsome thing. And I don't, Simon, was the version with just House 1 and House 2 in the booklet, was that only available in the US or?
That's right. Yeah, that was for the US market.
Yeah, that's the one to get.
I feel like after this panel, the price of those is going to go through the roof. We're going to have a run on those.
Yeah.
I suspect so. We have a question here from Analog Toys, who asks, was the choice to make the lead character a Vietnam veteran something that happened early on in the development of the story?
Yes. Yeah, that was part of the original concept. From Fred's original story.
Yeah.
For sure.
I can probably add a little bit to that, though, because Fred actually had two things going on at one time. He had this idea of the Vietnam veteran who'd killed his friend back in the war and was now suffering with these kinds of flashbacks. It was a character who was in counseling and was falling in love with his counselor, but was seeing these visions of his rotting war buddy appearing to him. And he also had this Twilight Zone anthology project that you guys were doing. And at one point he decided to combine the two so that he had this Vietnam veteran going into the house, and that's how it kind of evolved. But yeah, Ethan's right, that Vietnam veteran character was there really early on. I think that was something he wanted to pursue, certainly for the serious horror project in the house in Marin.
Yeah. That sounds
Yeah.
right.
What I find, what I really love about the film is that because of its lovely balance of, it's still very affecting, especially the scene where we get the flashback where Roger is unable to bring himself to kill Ben. So it's quite heady stuff, but then it's sort of exploring that in the safe environment of a horror comedy. So it works really well, and it seems odd to me that the ending could have been anything other than discovering that the child's disappearance was the result of Big Ben, because the two tie so neatly together at the end of the movie as it is now.
Right. Yeah, and also, yeah, that kind of devil's bargain the character's in, where he spares, he can't go through with killing the buddy, and then they drag him away and torture him. I mean, you don't know that did he suffer a fate worse than death, so to speak. So, he has that. He's in that bind where he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't.
Well, doesn't
which
Ben,
which I think exonerates him from the guilt. That he finally discovers at the end of the movie.
Right.
Through,
Doesn't Ben have a line where he's like, they tortured me for 2 weeks or something like that?
maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think there's a line where he says, I didn't die for 3 weeks or something, to kind of imply that he was.
He's mad he didn't kill him. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
how often is a character upset that you didn't kill them?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was also just, that storyline was also the metaphor for Vietnam. He's kind of, you leave and it's a disaster. You stay, it's a disaster, just like Afghanistan or something, where war becomes a choice between two bad choices and neither are any good.
Yep.
So it's kind of boiled down to this personal relationship of, do you end this thing or do you let it linger on and it could be worse? Joe Biden had to make that tough decision not too long ago. I don't know if Trump is his version of Big Ben, haunting him through. Not to get political or anything.
But it works really well that it feels as though it's sort of exploring the PTSD aspect that what Roger's going through is affecting his family. It's putting his family at risk, and it's only when he conquers it at the end of the movie that he's able to put his family sort of back together. I'm not sure if you're supposed to believe they'll get back together, but certainly he gets his kid back. So
yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Scott Hughes asks, wasn't there a Big Ben action figure made a few years back?
You do see stuff like that popping up once in a while. I don't think there's been anything that would be considered officially licensed, but you can certainly get Big Ben action figures if you look hard enough online, I think.
I think that sounds correct. Yeah.
Johnny Sorensen asks, who designed the poster art?
I have to go to Simon on that one. I'm not sure who the designer was. It was someone who...
Morrison is the name. Morrison.
It would have been someone that came through New World. It wasn't someone involved in the production.
I think if you look closely at the bell, the artist's name is imprinted vertically in the bell. I believe it's Morrison.
So if the art department, I don't know if they hired an outside artist, but it would have been someone through New World, and not the production itself.
And Kenny Whitty asks, other than the picture Simon has, is there any other props and scripts still around from the film? Any other fun memorabilia you'd like to share?
I don't think much has survived. I saw an eBay auction not long ago where someone had part of the War Demon for sale, and they were asking thousands of dollars, I think. But at this point, it just looked like a piece of yellow plastic with two glowing eyes, and that was literally all that was left. And I think a lot of that stuff, being like latex or whatever, is completely evaporated to dust at this point.
Yep.
He did say that there was another auction for the shopping bags that the grocery boy has. But
I'm not authenticating those.
I'm not sure that they could survive that long either at this point. I know that Forrest Ackerman, the sort of movie monster guy, had the lower half of Big Ben at one point. And as I mentioned, Sam McCain had some original pieces. I've got scripts from House. I've got Fred Decker's original 15-page Twilight Zone style vignette, which was included with the Arrow set, and a script I think Ethan sent me of a first draft. And I've got a House 2 script somewhere, but these wouldn't be things that would be considered like original objects from the time. They're probably reprints, I imagine, unless Ethan sent me his original copy, which I don't think so.
Well, I usually have a box for every project, and I usually have a couple of copies. It may have been, one of the original, copied versions from my old box,
Right.
But the only, I'm trying to think of what I have. The main thing I have is I have one of the crystal skulls, which makes an excellent doorstop. But like it's not, I've moved around a few times, so it's in a box somewhere.
I think I read that as trivia that you had the skull as a doorknob is what I read, but
I think that's fake news. It was doorstop.
Yeah. That makes way more sense. I was like, how would you do that?
I do also
Media gets everything wrong these days.
I do also have some Roger Cobb book covers, which I think you sent me, Ethan. There's Blood Dance, and also there's the same copy is on both books actually, and there's another one which he's supposed to have written called Sword of Bad, which is superb.
Well, that's a little bit of an inside joke. I did make up those. I always thought Blood Dance was a good title. But Sort of Bad came from my good friend Greg Wyden, who wrote Highlander.
Oh wow!
And when it came out, we were not fans. It was not. Greg had a great script, and when we first saw it's now, of course, this cult classic, but we were like, eh. And I teased Greg. I said, they should have titled that movie Sort of Bad. So I put that in the movie just so that when Greg saw it, he'd be like, "Oh, yeah, there it is." So we had a good laugh over that.
So King Eric says, I think it would be cool if Netflix or Amazon produced a House TV series like how Evil Dead was revived. Has there ever been any talk of reviving the franchise?
Does King Eric have a connection to Netflix that could help us? Occasionally I get an email from Sean Cunningham about doing remakes and things, and it never quite seems to materialize. So, and occasionally I get inquiries from filmmakers, filmmaker wannabes out there going, "Hey, I've got a great idea. Let's do a House sequel, or a House remake." And so the copyright, as far as I understand, I'm not sure who controls it at the moment, because I assume that Sean Cunningham does, but
I believe so.
Someone said no, he'd sold the rights to someone else, right? So I don't know where it stands right now, but I think he does, and I think it's been something that's been talked about and had possibilities. And at one point they wrote a script. Simon probably knows this, where they decided to turn the idea was to redo House except with a female lead instead of a male lead. This is around the time of the Ghostbusters remake, and I'm all for female-driven roles. I've written a bunch of scripts and genre scripts with female leads, but that's about the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And the script was one worse, dumber than that, what I read. So I was glad that never went anywhere. It was awful. So, and that's my official position on the subject.
Anything else that you've heard, Simon, over the years? No, that was it really. I think that came via Ethan, that there was another script floating around out there, which was a kind of gender swap version of House. But that's pretty much all I've heard. Yeah. Well, we've reached the end of our time here. So I'll just read out this comment. This panel has been absolutely incredible. Wonderful guests, great conversation. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm off to wrangle some Ewoks now. So I would just say thank you to Ethan and Simon for joining us today to talk about House. It's been really great. Thank you so much. A
And I
pleasure.
finally have an epitaph for my tombstone, the Ewok Wrangler.
And for all you Iconicon viewers, the next thing coming up is a premiere from Analog Toys, who made that comment on 007 Action Man toys from Hasbro with love. So hang
We
around
need to
for
tell
that.
Fred Decker about that one. He's a 007 fanatic.
Really?
Nice.
Better let Fred know that.
We're actually doing a interview with Andre Gower from Monster Squad too. So
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
That's
yeah,
good.
it was nice to see both those movies, that Night of the Creeps, get their due finally after many years.
yeah.
Yeah.
They got huge followings now.
Yeah.
As
Thank you
has
very much, guys.
That's house.
Yes,
Thanks
gentlemen,
very
this
much.
has been fantastic.
Thank
Really had
you,
a
guys.
lot of fun.
And we'll do it again soon.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
When you're ready to talk Children of the Corn Part 5.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right, signing off.
Bye-bye.